The vast observatory of the Galactic Center for Planetary Studies hung suspended in the darkness of space, its crystalline structures refracting starlight into rainbow patterns across its surface. Inside the main research chamber, senior researcher Zilix stared at the holographic display with all four of his optical organs, his iridescent scales shifting from their usual calm blue to an agitated purple. "This has to be an equipment malfunction," he chittered, his auxiliary appendages tapping frantically across multiple control surfaces. "Run the analysis again. Vex." The artificial intelligence hummed softly as it processed the request. "Analysis complete, senior researcher. Results remain consistent with previous 47 iterations. The radiation levels from planetary system Sol 3 exceed survivable parameters by 47.3%. The gravity readings suggest a crushing force of 9.8 meters per second squared. Atmospheric composition includes multiple corrosive elements. By all established metrics, the planet designated Earth should be incompatible with complex life." Zilix's scales rippled with frustration. He'd spent the last 3 cycles studying anomalous readings from the outer spiral arm of the galaxy, expecting to find nothing more than a scientific curiosity. Instead, he'd stumbled upon something impossible, a planet that defied every known parameter for life-bearing worlds. The door to the research chamber whispered open, admitting First Director Nexai. The crystalline being's form sparkled with bands of light that indicated intense interest. "I receive your urgent message, Zilix. What have you found?" "Director, I believe we've discovered something unprecedented." Zilix gestured toward the holographic display. "This world, it shouldn't exist. At least, nothing should live there. But our long-range scans indicate a thriving civilization." The First Director's crystalline form pulsed with skepticism. "Explain." "The planet's core is partially molten metal, creating a magnetic field so powerful it should tear apart any organic molecules. The atmosphere is a toxic soup of nitrogen, oxygen, and other corrosive gases. The gravity alone should make complex life impossible. And yet," Zilix manipulated the controls, bringing up detailed scans of Earth's surface. "There are cities, technology, and the dominant species appears to have evolved naturally in these conditions." Nexai moved closer to the display, her crystalline form refracting the holographic light. "Could they be artificial constructs, or perhaps visitors who've adapted the environment?" "No, Director. We've intercepted their communications, analyzed their genetic structure from long-range scans. They call themselves humans, and they evolved on this Deathworld. They breathe corrosive oxygen, drink hydrogen hydroxide, and their bodies are mostly liquid water. They survive in conditions that would kill most species in the galaxy instantly." The First Director's form flickered with concern. "Show me their capabilities." Zilix brought up more data streams. They routinely survive temperatures ranging from 233 to 319 Kelvin. Their bones are reinforced with calcium. Yes, the reactive metal. Their bodies regularly repair damage that would be fatal to other species. And their neural networks. He paused, his scales shifting to a deep crimson. Their brains are constantly active, processing multiple streams of information simultaneously while maintaining full consciousness. "Impossible," Nexai whispered, her crystalline form dimming with shock. "No species could evolve such adaptations naturally. The energy cost alone." "That's not even the most remarkable part," Zilix continued. "They appear to be aware of their planet's hostile nature, yet they thrive on challenge. They deliberately expose themselves to additional environmental stresses for what they call entertainment. They climb frozen mountains, dive into pressure-crushing depths, and deliberately subject themselves to extreme physical exertion." The First Director was silent for a long moment, her form pulsing with rapid calculations. "This changes everything, Zilix. If a species can evolve to survive such conditions, what else might they be capable of?" "There's more, Director." Zilix's scales shifted to the deep green of serious concern. "Based on their technological progression rate, They'll achieve independent faster-than-light travel within the next 2 decades. They're advancing at an exponential rate, adapting and improving their technology as rapidly as they've adapted to their hostile world. We need to convene the council, Nexay decided. A species that evolved on a death world, that treats lethal conditions as challenges to overcome. They could be either the greatest allies or the greatest threat the galaxy has ever known. Zylix's scales rippled with agreement. There's one other thing, Director. We've analyzed their entertainment and cultural transmissions. They're not just physically adapted to survive impossible conditions. They seem to take pride in it. They have countless stories about overcoming impossible odds, surviving unsurvivable situations. It's deeply embedded in their psychology. Prepare a full report, the first director ordered. Include everything. Their physiological adaptations, technological progress, psychological profiles. The Council must understand what we're dealing with. A species that evolved on a death world wouldn't just be tough. They'd be virtually unkillable by conventional standards. As Zylix began compiling the data, he couldn't shake a growing sense of awe and trepidation. The galaxy had evolved countless species, from energy beings to silicon-based life forms, but nothing like humans. They weren't just survivors. They were the product of millions of years of evolution in conditions that should have prevented life from emerging at all. The implications were staggering. If humans could survive and thrive in conditions that the galaxy considered universally lethal, what would happen when they discovered they were among the most durable species in known space? What would they do with that knowledge? As the first director left the research chamber, her crystalline form dimmed to a thoughtful azure. The discovery of humanity wasn't just a scientific breakthrough. It was a moment that would reshape galactic society forever. The only question was whether the galaxy was ready for a species that had been forged in the fires of a world that should have been impossible to survive. The diplomatic vessel Seeker of Truth descended through Earth's atmosphere, its advanced shielding systems straining against what the crew considered a hostile environment. In the ship's main observation chamber, Ambassador Kilura's crystalline form shimmered with barely contained anxiety as she watched the approach to the human diplomatic facility. Atmospheric corrosion levels are within expected parameters, reported Chief Scientific Officer Zylix, his scales now a professional shade of blue-gray. Though I still can't believe they choose to live in this soup of reactive gases. The landing was smooth despite the crushing gravity, as the external sensors reported conditions that would be lethal to most galactic species. The delegation prepared to meet their first humans. They had chosen a small team: Ambassador Kilura, Zylix, and 2 security specialists equipped with the most advanced protective gear available. The airlock cycled, and a human diplomatic team entered the ship's specially prepared reception area. Ambassador Kilura noted with shock that they wore only light protective gear, simple clothing that left their faces and hands exposed to the brutal environment. "Welcome to Earth," the lead human said, smiling. The expression caused Zylix's instruments to record an unexpected spike in neural activity. "I'm Ambassador Sarah Chen. We're honored to host the first official galactic delegation to our world." The meeting proceeded smoothly, but the alien delegation couldn't help noticing things that defied their understanding of biology. The humans moved effortlessly despite the crushing gravity. They showed no signs of distress breathing the caustic atmosphere. Their body temperature remained steady at levels that should have denatured their proteins. "We've prepared a series of cultural exchange activities," Ambassador Chen explained, "including a tour of our primary research facility and a demonstration of human capabilities that we believe will interest you." The delegation followed their hosts to a massive complex filled with various testing chambers. What they witnessed over the next several hours would change their understanding of life itself. In one chamber, a human athlete demonstrated physical capabilities that seemed impossible. He lifted weights that would crush most species, his reinforced skeleton, and dense musculature handling forces that should have torn him apart. The alien observers watched in stunned silence as he continued exercising well past the point where their instruments indicated he should have collapsed from exhaustion. "How?" Xylix began, his scales shifting to puzzled green. "Your lactic acid levels suggest your muscles should have failed several minutes ago." The athlete shrugged, a gesture the aliens were still trying to understand. "You push through it. Mind over matter, you know." In another chamber, they witnessed humans testing survival gear in extreme conditions. A researcher voluntarily entered a chamber cooled to temperatures that would freeze most species solid. Not only did she survive, but she remained fully functional, her body's remarkable homeostatic mechanisms maintaining critical functions. "Your thermal regulation systems are extraordinary," Kilara observed, her crystalline form pulsing with scientific excitement. "But surely there are limits." "Oh, definitely," Ambassador Chen replied. "But you'd be surprised what humans can survive. There's a group called the Polar Bear Club that swims in frozen lakes for fun." The delegation's security specialists exchanged alarmed glances at this casual mention of recreational exposure to lethal conditions. The demonstrations continued, humans in pressure chambers surviving forces that should have crushed them. Endurance runners maintaining peak performance for hours in the punishing gravity. A martial arts demonstration that showed humans could move with devastating speed and precision despite their dense bone structure. But it was the psychological testing that truly shook the delegation. Humans solved complex problems while under what should have been debilitating stress. They remained calm in situations that would drive most species to panic. They demonstrated an ability to ignore pain that defied biological logic. "We're still not sure how they do it," Xylix muttered to Ambassador Kilara during a brief recess. "Their pain receptors are functioning normally. They feel everything. They just choose to continue despite it." The day's most startling revelation came during an emergency response demonstration. A simulated crisis situation showed humans rushing into danger to save others, ignoring obvious threats to their own survival. "This behavior," Kilara asked Chen afterward, "this is common among your species. Rushing into danger to help others. Pretty common, yes. It's just what humans do." The ambassador's crystalline form flickered with concern. "But it defies all rational survival instincts." Chen smiled again, that mysterious expression that their analysts still couldn't fully interpret. Sometimes the strongest survival instinct is making sure others survive too. As the delegation prepared to return to their ship, they gathered to discuss their findings. The implications were clear. Humanity wasn't just adapted to survive on a death world. They had developed capabilities that went beyond mere survival. "They don't just endure these conditions," Xylix reported, his scales now a thoughtful purple. "They actively seek out new challenges. Their response to adversity isn't to avoid it, but to overcome it. And then, astoundingly, they look for greater challenges." Ambassador Kilara's form pulsed with agreement. "The Council must be informed immediately. These humans, they're not just surviving against impossible odds. They're thriving on them. And now they're reaching for the stars." As their ship broke Earth's atmosphere, the delegation couldn't shake the feeling that they had just witnessed something unprecedented in galactic history. They had expected to find beings barely surviving on a hostile world. Instead, they had found a species that had turned survival itself into an art form, pushing the very boundaries of what life could achieve. The galaxy would never be the same. The question was no longer whether humanity could survive among the stars. It was whether the stars were ready for humanity. The emergency session of the Galactic Council erupted into chaos as the holographic displays showed another colony world going dark. The swarm, as they had come to be known, had appeared from the depths of uncharted space 3 standard months ago, and nothing had been able to stop their advance. First Director Nexe's crystalline form pulsed with urgent patterns as she addressed the assembled representatives. "The Arcturus defense fleet has fallen. The Meridian colonies are overrun. Our most advanced weapons barely slow them down. We are facing an unprecedented crisis. The council chamber's air rippled with the distressed emanations of dozens of species. The swarm's ships seemed immune to conventional weapons, their biological technology adapting to each new strategy faster than the council races could develop countermeasures. Perhaps, Ambassador Kilura's voice cut through the chaos, her crystalline form glowing with determination. It's time we ask for help from those who understand survival better than any of us. A murmur of confusion rippled through the chamber. Xylix, now serving as Earth's official scientific liaison, stepped forward, his scales shifting to the deep blue of serious purpose. "The humans have been observing our battle footage," he announced. "They've already developed several theoretical strategies for combating the swarm. Their perspective is unique." The chamber's main holographic display activated, showing a human military strategist. The council members watched with growing amazement as she systematically broke down the swarm's tactics, pointing out vulnerabilities that none of their analysts had noticed. "They're not invincible," Colonel Sarah Chen, the former ambassador who had transitioned to military liaison, explained. "They're using their adaptability as a crutch, but they've never faced an enemy that adapts faster than they do." The council members exchanged uncertain glances. A representative of the silicon-based Petrovi spoke up, their crystalline surface crackling with skepticism. "How can any species adapt faster than a biological collective?" Colonel Chen's smile reminded Xylix of Earth's apex predators. "Because we've been doing it our entire evolutionary history. Every time the swarm adapts, they have to spread that adaptation through their entire collective. Humans, we adapt as individuals, instantly, constantly. We've turned survival into an art form." The footage that followed stunned the council into silence. Human special forces teams had already begun engaging swarm units in test battles, where the council's armies had fought with rigid tactics and predictable strategies. Humans fought like forces of nature. They used the very environmental hazards that should have killed them as weapons, turning the swarm's adaptability against itself. "Look at this," Xylix pointed to a particular engagement, his scales rippling with excitement. The swarm adapted to handle extreme cold, so the humans immediately switched to heat-based attacks. When the swarm adapted to heat, the humans were already moving on to pressure differentials. They're not trying to find one solution. They're forcing the swarm to adapt so rapidly that it's overwhelming their collective consciousness. The council watched as human troops demonstrated battlefield adaptability that seemed impossible. They fought on in conditions that would incapacitate most species, their bodies pushing far beyond normal biological limits. They improvised weapons from available materials, turned environmental hazards into tactical advantages, and displayed a level of individual initiative that the hierarchical swarm couldn't counter. "But the most remarkable thing," Colonel Chen continued, "is that we can teach other species to do this. Not to the same extent. We've had millions of years of evolution in a death world to perfect these traits. But we can teach the fundamental principles." The implications hit the council like a shockwave. Humanity wasn't just offering to fight their war. They were offering to teach the galaxy how to survive like humans. First Director Nexai's form pulsed with the patterns of a momentous decision. "You're proposing to train our forces." "We've already begun developing the programs," Chen confirmed. "We call it the Deathworld Survival School. Your troops will learn not just how to fight, but how to think like humans, how to adapt, improvise, and overcome, how to keep fighting when every logical analysis says you should be dead." The council chamber erupted in a mixture of hope and trepidation. The prospect of learning humanity's survival techniques was both thrilling and terrifying. What would it mean for galactic civilization to learn the ways of Deathworld evolution? Xylix's instruments recorded the subtle changes in the chamber's atmosphere as the various species processed this proposal. The fear was still there, but now it was tinged with something else. The first glimmer of genuine hope since the swarm had appeared. "The galaxy is about to change," he muttered to Kilura. "Teaching other species to think like humans, we're not just gaining weapons against the swarm. We're fundamentally altering the course of galactic evolution." Kilara's crystalline form shimmered with agreement. Perhaps that's exactly what we need. The galaxy has grown soft, comfortable. We've forgotten what it means to truly survive. As the council moved to vote on the human proposal, Colonel Chen stood quietly, watching the proceedings with that same predatory smile. Humanity was about to show the galaxy what it meant to be forged in the fires of evolution's harshest crucible. The age of comfortable existence was over. The time had come for the galaxy to learn how to survive. The training facility on Mars hummed with activity as beings from across the galaxy pushed themselves beyond what they had once considered their absolute limits. In the observation chamber, Ambassador Kilara watched alongside Xylix as Colonel Chen supervised another group of alien soldiers attempting to complete what the humans called an obstacle course in Mars' punishing gravity. "They're improving," Xylix noted, his scales showing patterns of amazement. 6 weeks ago, none of them could even stand up here. Now look at them. A crystalline Petrovi warrior was leading the group, its normally rigid form showing unprecedented flexibility as it adapted to the challenging conditions. Behind it, various species that had once been considered physically incompatible were working together, supporting each other, pushing forward despite exhaustion that should have been debilitating. "Watch this," Colonel Chen said, activating the environmental controls. The temperature in the training area plummeted rapidly. In the past, such a sudden change would have sent most species into shock. Now, they responded as they'd been taught, adapting, compensating, continuing their mission despite the hostile conditions. "They're learning to think like humans," Kilara observed, her form pulsing with a mixture of awe and concern. "Not just to endure, but to adapt and overcome." The results were already showing on the battlefield. The first graduation class of the Deathworld Survival School had engaged the swarm 2 weeks ago. The footage from that battle had shaken the galaxy's understanding of warfare. The holographic display showed the engagement in detail. A mixed species unit, trained by humans, had encountered a swarm force on the colony world of New Arcturus. Where traditional armies would have formed rigid battle lines, this unit dispersed, using the harsh terrain to their advantage. They employed rapidly changing tactics, forcing the swarm to adapt repeatedly until its collective consciousness began to show signs of strain. "Look at this moment." Shen pointed to a particular sequence. A Petrovi warrior had been cut off from its unit, facing what should have been certain death. In the past, it would have accepted its fate. Instead, it had improvised a weapon from its surrounding environment, used the crystal formations of its home species in ways never before considered, and not only survived but eliminated an entire swarm pod. "That's the key," Chen explained. "We're not just teaching them to fight. We're teaching them to survive, to think beyond their limitations, to see death as a challenge to overcome rather than an inevitability to accept." The impact on galactic society was profound. Species that had once defined themselves by their limitations were discovering potential they never knew they possessed. The rigid hierarchies and cautious approaches that had dominated galactic civilization for millennia were giving way to something new, something more adaptable, more resilient. "Incoming priority transmission," the facility's AI announced. The main display shifted to show a battle in progress. The swarm had launched a major offensive against the Meridian defense line. But this time, the defense forces were ready. The assembled observers watched in amazement as the newly trained mixed species units engaged the swarm. They used environmental hazards as weapons, turning vacuum exposure, radiation, and extreme temperatures to their advantage. When the swarm adapted to one tactic, they immediately switched to another, maintaining a pace of tactical evolution that the collective consciousness couldn't match. "There," Xylix pointed, his scales showing excitement. "The swarm is starting to fragment. Their adaptive responses are becoming erratic. They've never encountered an enemy that could outpace their evolution before." The battle footage showed something else, something that made even the hardened military observers pause. A human commander had been severely wounded, the kind of injury that should have been instantly fatal. Instead of falling, they had sealed their suit breach with their own blood-formed clots, redirected their suit's power through their own nervous system, and continued leading their unit to victory. How? Kilara asked, her crystalline form flickering with disbelief. The physical trauma alone. That's what we've been trying to tell you, Chen replied with a grim smile. Humans don't accept death easily. We've spent millions of years evolving ways to tell death not today. Now we're teaching the galaxy to do the same. The implications were staggering. The swarm had evolved as a collective, sharing adaptations across its entire consciousness. But humans had evolved as individuals, each one capable of instant, independent adaptation. Now they were spreading that capability across the galaxy, creating an army of survivors that could adapt faster than any collective consciousness. Reports began flowing in from other fronts. The swarm's advance had not just been halted. It was being pushed back. Their biological technology, once thought invincible, was being overwhelmed by the sheer variety and speed of adaptations they faced. This is more than just winning a war, Xylix realized, his scales shifting to thoughtful purple. We're witnessing the next step in galactic evolution. The comfortable species of the core worlds are learning what it means to be forged in adversity. As they watched another group of trainees push themselves beyond their supposed limits, Colonel Chen nodded in agreement. That's the real victory here. Long after the swarm is defeated, the galaxy will remember what we taught them. How to survive. How to adapt. How to overcome. The price of evolution wasn't just about humanity anymore. It was about teaching an entire galaxy that the limits they had accepted for so long were just another obstacle to overcome. The viewing gallery of the Galactic Council chamber was packed with representatives from across known space as First Director Nexai officially declared the swarm war over. Her crystalline form blazed with triumph as she announced the final victory. But every being present knew that the galaxy they had known was gone forever. In the 5 years since humans had begun teaching their survival techniques to other species, galactic civilization had transformed in ways no one could have predicted. Xylix, now serving as the head of the new Xenological Adaptation Institute, watched the proceedings with scales shifting between thoughtful purple and excited blue. They're still having trouble processing it, Colonel Chen said, standing beside him. The fact that the swarm didn't just retreat, they asked for peace. The final battle had become legendary almost instantly. The swarm, facing opponents that could adapt faster than their collective consciousness, had experienced something entirely new: existential fear. Their biological ships had encountered beings that treated lethal conditions as tactical advantages, that survived situations their collective mind had calculated as impossible, that kept fighting long past the point where death should have claimed them. It wasn't just fear, Xylix noted, checking his latest research data. Our analysis suggests the swarm experienced a fundamental shift in their collective consciousness. Exposure to human-trained forces actually altered their evolutionary path. They began developing individual adaptations rather than collective ones. The evidence was clear in the peace negotiations that followed. The swarm had split into multiple independent collectives, each one beginning to exhibit traits that would have been impossible before their encounter with humanity: individual initiative, creative problem-solving, and most surprisingly, curiosity about their former enemies. The changes weren't limited to the swarm. Across the galaxy, species that had once been defined by their limitations were discovering new potential. The Petrovi, once bound by their crystalline nature, had learned to become as flexible as their human teachers. The gaseous Aetheri had developed techniques for surviving in solid form. Even the energy-based Lumini had learned to maintain coherence in conditions that would have once dispersed them instantly. Look at them, Ambassador Kilara said, joining them at the viewing gallery. Her crystalline form had developed an unprecedented range of colors and patterns since beginning human survival training. Every species here has been through the Deathworld survival school. They're not the same beings they were 5 years ago. The changes went far beyond military applications. The human approach to survival, the constant drive to adapt, to overcome, to push beyond perceived limits, had infected galactic culture at every level. Scientific research had accelerated as researchers adopted human-style trial-and-error approaches. Exploration had surged as species discovered they could survive in environments they had once considered impossible. The latest statistics are remarkable. Xylix reported, his scales showing patterns of academic excitement. Species-wide survival rates have increased by an average of 300%. Environmental adaptation capabilities have expanded exponentially. We're seeing evolutionary changes that should have taken millions of years occurring within generations. The main chamber's holographic display showed footage from across the galaxy. A Petrovi explorer surviving a stellar flare that should have shattered their crystalline form. An aethery scientist maintaining cohesion in liquid environments to study ocean worlds. A mixed-species construction team working in conditions that would have been considered universally lethal just years ago. We've created something entirely new, Chen observed. Not just survivors, but beings who understand that survival itself is an art form, a challenge to be mastered rather than a limit to be accepted. The implications extended even further. Species that had once been bitter enemies found common ground in their shared experience of human training. The rigid hierarchies that had dominated galactic politics for millennia were giving way to more adaptable, resilient forms of organization. Even art and culture had been transformed, with species incorporating the concept of overcoming impossible odds into their own traditions. There are concerns, of course, Kilara noted, her form showing patterns of thoughtful consideration. Some say we've made the galaxy more dangerous, that teaching everyone to survive like humans means teaching them to fight like humans. They're not wrong, Chen admitted, but they're missing the point. We didn't just teach them to survive, we taught them to thrive in adversity, to see challenges as opportunities for growth. That's changing how they approach everything, not just conflict. The proof was in the new institutions sprouting up across the galaxy. The Deathworld Survival School had expanded far beyond military training, offering courses in environmental adaptation, crisis response, and what humans called extreme problem solving. The Xenological Adaptation Institute was documenting unprecedented rates of beneficial mutation as species pushed themselves to new limits. But perhaps the most profound change was philosophical. The galaxy had always seen evolution as a slow, gradual process, something that happened to species over millions of years. Humanity had shown them that evolution could be conscious, immediate, driven by will and determination as much as by environment and time. The price of evolution, Xylix mused, watching the continuing celebrations, wasn't just survival. It was understanding that survival itself is just the beginning, that every limit is just another challenge to overcome. As the ceremony concluded, the gathered representatives began to disperse, each returning to worlds that were rapidly becoming as challenging and dynamic as Earth itself. The comfortable, stable galaxy of the past was gone. In its place was something new, a civilization of survivors, of adapters, of beings who had learned that the greatest evolutionary advantage wasn't strength or speed or intelligence, but the sheer determination to overcome any obstacle. The age of comfortable existence was over. The age of conscious evolution had begun. And humanity, the species that had evolved on a death world, that had turned survival into an art form, was leading the way into this bold new future.